everybody, welcome to Excel video 379. I'm Nate Moore. Just got back from speaking to two groups, one in Boston, one in Atlanta last week. If I haven't spoken to your organization lately, I'd love to. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit more about the timelines we introduced last time. First thing I want to do is show you some of the options that are available when you have a timeline and you select it and you get timeline tools. We talked last time about how you can change from years to quarters, months, and days. The rest of the options are up here. You can change the style of the timeline in terms of colors, and there's a bunch of different types of styles you could do. You can work with the height and width and size and arrangement and all that kind of stuff. I want to talk just briefly about what these components are. This date here, I can turn that on and off as the header. See the selection label tells you here what you've selected. And now it's back on. The scroll bar, hopefully you can see that in this version here, goes away. Makes it really hard to change. I mean, you can come over here and make it say April now, but it's hard to go up and down through the time frame without showing the scroll bar. And then the time level is this piece here that we were filtering before. So you can turn those on and off and change some colors. Let me show you two things that I'm a little bit concerned about when it comes to timelines. First thing is, if we come back to years and look at my date range here, it says from 2011 to 2014. Well, look at my dates over here. They go 2000. Well, let's select everything. Look at my dates here as I scroll. I've only got dates through 2013, yet my timeline shows through 2014, and I can do this and say, hey, give me everything in 2014. Well, there isn't anything. I think it's a little bit confusing for the timeline where my data ends at 12/31/13 to show 14 on the timeline. It's confusing to me, and it may be confusing to some of your users as well, to have data that's there on the timeline that's not in the pivot table. You contrast that with a slicer. Let's do a slicer for years, and let's do a slicer for location. And let's start with, I'm going to move years out of the way. The thing I like about slicers is I can tell Boston, Chicago, Honolulu, Marine Corps, there they are. I don't have anything in my slicer that's not in my data. Whereas my timeline has 2014 that's not in my data. That's caveat number one. Caveat number two is if I pick Boston here, my pivot table immediately changes, says Boston, Honolulu, Chicago. If I come over here and, well, you know, it works both ways. Let me show you this too. If I do Chicago and Honolulu, there's Chicago and Honolulu. It works both ways. Now let's do the same thing with a timeline and say, all right, let's look at the year 2012. This works, but when I come over here and say, no, I want the year 2013, let's take everything off and just do 2013. This changes, but see my timeline goes back and says all periods. See, it's not consistent between the two. And if I come over here and do months, and I want to do, so I have no data in 2014, even though it shows it. So let's just go, say, to April 2013. I don't have that information is readily available here. I can come over here and notice what Excel's doing. There's a date filter between that runs from 1/1/2011 to 4/30/2013. So it changed it this way. But if I come over here and go 1/1/2012, it changed back. If it can change, it will. But if I come over here and come to 2013, now I come back to all periods. See how it's not consistent because I have options here that I don't have the way the timeline's displayed. Watch out for that where your pivot table may be filtering things that your timeline doesn't show. I hope that makes sense. You can do filters here or in here that your timeline may not show. Whereas if you change a slicer here, whatever you do here is going to be reflected in the slicer. And if you print the slicer on your pivot table, it's going to be obvious. If you print your timeline on your pivot table, it may or may not be accurate. Whereas if I have a slicer, if I go 2011, that works. And if I come over here and do 2011 and 2012, this is going to show 2011 and 2012. The slicer is going to reflect it, but this won't. Why would I use a timeline? With those two caveats, I think the most powerful feature of a timeline is this. If you come back into the timeline and the options, like a slicer, you can connect a timeline to multiple pivot tables. I happen to have only one pivot table in this spreadsheet, but if I had 6 pivot tables looking at collections by location and by provider and by referring physician and by CPT code and by 2 or 3 other things, I could connect all of those pivot tables to one timeline and change to look at, let's see, maybe second quarter 2013, and every single connected pivot table would update. That's the power of a timeline, is to be able to change multiple pivot tables at once by connecting the timeline to pivot tables. You can do the same thing with slicers here. That's what I want to show you about timelines. Kind of some gotchas about keeping track of what have I selected here versus what is the timeline showing. Some gotchas about the timeline showing dates that aren't really available in the data, but a very powerful way to do report connections, and some filtering options. That's what I wanted to say about timelines. Stay tuned next time. We'll keep going. Thanks for watching.